Hello everybody, Nick the Tiro here. It's time to start talking about arrays. We have been using the declaration of variables, if we were counting the number of students or a particular student, but what happens when you have a collection or a series of things that are fundamentally the same? For example, cars. You might have a BMW, you might have a Mercedes or whatever, high price cars. How would we store that? Would we want to create a individual variable for every single car? That would get almost tedious. Say car one is equal to Chevy, car two is equal to Ford, car three. And you can see that gets very, very tedious. Programming languages allow something called an array. An array is a special type of variable that allows you to store a series or a list of data types. So let's say I created an array called cars. I can reference the individual elements in that list of cars. And we, in previous classes, we talked about indices, and that's going to become critical in our discussion. So it's going to be one type of variable called an array, and in Python we call that a list. Arrays and lists are not exactly the same thing, but we can simulate an array using a list inside Python. But we would then reference the individual elements within that list or array using an indice. Now, let me go up to my screen and we are going to do one of those DMOJ projects again. So this is going to be a two-part video. One is just to kind of work out the kinks associated with dealing with lists. And then the second video will be actually solving the problem that they want. So let's head up to my screen. Now, if we look at my screen here, let's read this. It says, student council is looking to organize a school brunch where the proceeds will be put towards a year-end trip for the graduating class. The council members decide that the price depends on how many years you have been at the school. For someone who has been at the school for 1 year, the price will be $12. For somebody who's been there for 2 years, $10, 3 years, $7. Now, we can easily create, in this particular situation, 4 variables. Y1 is equal to 12, Y2 is equal to 10, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That'd be very inefficient because we're going to see there's other lists that we have to accomplish. So what we're going to do is we're going to initially build a list of just the prices that are associated per year. Now, let me go to my spreadsheet that I created here. And I have this list called brunch prices. It's going to be a fixed list, which basically means is I'm going to assign the list values. And in Python, we break down lists as given a list name is going to be equal to bracket and then individual elements inside that list. This particular list has 4 elements, the year 1 element, the year 2 element, the year 3 element, and the year 4 element. And if we look here, we have our nice friend called indices. So the first element in this list is referenced by indice 0. The second element of this list is represented by 1, third 2, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We've seen that and we've demonstrated that in some other videos. So one of the first things we're going to do in this project is we want to create a list of how much it costs for the brunch prices. So let's go to we're going to go to our replit here. And you know what I'm going to start doing? I'm going to start coding this stuff so we can remember while we're on the screen. And I'm going to do some copying and pasting to save some time here. But I'm going to put a comment here, right? And the comment basically says, hard code brunch prices, Y1. I don't want to do it this way. I want to create a list. So what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to use my old friend copy and paste to save some time, and you don't have to see me make my typos here. I create a list called brunch price. You know what? Brunch prices. This is going to be plural, brunch prices. We want to get into the habit of thinking in singular and thinking in plurals. When we talk about lists, we often, or a lot of times, lists or arrays, we refer to them in the plural. These are brunch prices. All right? Now, that's going to that's going to basically put this series. How would I reference those? How would I reference those brunch prices? Well, for this demonstration, real quick, I can say print brunch prices and then give it an indice. If I want to see the very first one, I can do it as 0. All right. And if I run this over here that we see, now I'm going to increase my screen size. It's a little easier for everybody to read at home, right? What if I wanted to see the second one? Well, then I would do the indice 1, run it. So you can see immediately if this list or array starts getting very, very large, and we will often see very large lists, hundreds, thousands of elements in there. And we can reference individual ones, or we can iterate through from our loops. We can iterate through those lists. And you know what? Let me demonstrate that real quick. If I wanted to see all the prices, I can say for price in brunch prices, print price. Now this is one way of iterating through. Give it a second. And there, what if I wanted to use some kind of integer as an indice? Well, I could do the same thing there. I can say I is equal to 0, not double 0. I is equal to 0. And I can say for I in range of 4 values. All right. And I'll do the exact same thing. And I'll say brunches or brunch prices, I. And this is going to iterate through 4 times. It's going to iterate through this list up here. Give it a second. Yep, and I typed everything right. So list or arrays, again, in Python we don't use arrays, but in lists, it is an efficient way to basically have a single variable, but have content or many elements within that given variable. All right. Well, let's go back to the problem. All right. Well, it's kind of said, okay. Now it says this is eventually we're going to calculate of all the proceeds can be saved towards the year-end trip as the 50%. So they're basically saying is they're going to have all these brunches, and there's going to be a certain segment of the population, the students, and certain percentages, and I'll break that down in a second. But in the students, so like a first-year student is going to pay $12. Of the $12, $6 is going to go towards paying for the brunch. The other $6 is going to go towards the cost of the trip. It's a fundraiser, right? And we will definitely talk about the actual fundraiser and the cost in a second. Now, let's take a look at our input specification. What are we getting to work with? Well, it says we're basically going to have 3 inputs here. For each of the trips, the first line will show the cost of the trip as an integer. All right. Well, we can do that fairly quickly. So let's go back to our Replit, and we're going to say cost of trip, and that is going to be equal to input from the line. Now, if you remember from our previous conversations, we know that input in Python is going to input a string. I want this to be an integer, so I'm basically going to typecast this. We've seen this several times in this course, all right? Well, that was easy. Let's go back. Now, it says the next line will contain 4 floating point numbers, right? Basically separated by a space. Now, here's where we can get a little creative. Now, what I tend to recommend in these particular situations where you are going to grab information, now let's show you, this is the sample data. So we basically get, total cost of the trip, and then they're going to give us this data here, separated by spaces, and that's going to be important. So scroll down, what I want to do is grab the entire line all at once. And that's going to there's a reason for that madness. So I'm going to go back to my Replit, and I'm going to say temp string. I'm going to grab that. I'm intentionally grabbing it as a string for a reason. And I'm going to grab the whole thing. So I'm not going to typecast it. I'm not going to worry about it being a, what was the phrase they use? I'm not, that it's a floating point number. I don't care. I'm going to initially grab it as a string. All right. And then there's going to be one more input. All right, the next input, the third line contains a single number which contains the total number of students attending the brunch. We look at it, that 2 is an integer. All right, so going back here, guess what we're going to do? We are going to grab the total number of students is going to be equal to input. And again, since this is a single number and we know it's going to be an integer, we can typecast it. Now you're saying, why aren't we typecasting here? Because under temp string, we're grabbing a series of numbers, and we want to take those series of numbers and create a list from those numbers. Now, let me go back to my spreadsheet here. So we built one string. How about percentage of students? What I eventually want to get is I want to build a list called percentage of students that's going to have each of the individual elements will be the percentage of the students in the class. So let's say hypothetically there are 100 students 100 total students going to brunch. 10% of them are going to be first year students, 10% of them are going to be second year students, 50% of them are going to be third year students, 40% of them are going to be fourth year students. So we're going to have a total number of students. We're going to build a list of percentages of those students. All right. So let's go back here. Now, I want a list. I'm going to create an empty list. So I basically created an empty list. And now what I want to do is I want to take that temporary string and I want to put that temporary string into a temporary list. This is the actual list that I'm trying to build. I'm trying to build a list of those percentage of students, but I got to go through a couple steps here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a temp list. And you'll see why in a second. And then what I'm going to do is I am going to take that string, the temporary string here, and I'm going to say temp list is actually going to be populated with temp string split. Now, in other quick videos, I talked about what the split is, but what this is going to do is going to take that temporary string and basically split that temporary string into smaller strings based upon that space. Now, if I run this, well, not run this, but if I just say print temp list, let's print this. So I'll clear this screen over here. Give it a second. So let's run this program. And the first thing we got to give it, if we look back up here in the input, we need the cost of the trip. We're just going to say $1,000, all right? Now, that's what we hear. Now we're going to do the temporary string. So we're going to say 0.1 space, 0.1 space, 0.5 space, 0.3. Make sure everything adds up. That should be equal to, those are percentages. I could do 0.10, but I'm just going to do 0.1. And then I'll hit enter. And now it's asking me for total number of students. We're going to say 100 students. It really doesn't matter at this point. So the total cost of the trip is $1,000. Percentage of students is going to be 0.1, 0.1, 0.5, 0.3, and then we're going to have 100 potential students. We look at this code here. Let's see what the temp list looks like. And it basically took that temp string here. Remember, this is a temp string. It took that and converted that into a temporary list. And notice very subtly, those are strings. Those are not real numbers. Those are strings. If I try to do any math associated with them, this will break, right? So one of the first things I need to do is I need to really create this list here, this percentage of students here. So I'm going to say for item in temp list, so basically grab one of the things in temp list, and I'm going to say percentage of students, right? Dot append the float value of the item. Now, let's break this down. This is basically doing a for loop. It's going to go through every single element of this list, of this temp list, and then it's going to grab an element from the temp list, convert it to a float, and then append it or put it on the back of the percentage of students, percentage of student list. Now, let's run this. Let me get rid of all my things. And what I'm going to do is when I'm done with the for, I'm going to say print percentage of students. And let's run this. Oh, we'll say $1,000, 0.1, 0.1, 0.5, 0.3, 100 students. Put that right, 100 students. And now you'll notice that percentage of students is actually a float number. So I basically created this, right? So I inputted a temporary string, I split it into a temporary list, then I iterated through that temporary list, changing the string from the string to the float and appending that to percentage of students, right? So now I have two lists. If you remember correctly, I have a list called brunch price, not prince. Just noticed that. Brunch price, should be brunch prices. We have percentage of students. Now we have to build a list that is the distribution of those students. The distribution of those students are, we're going to take the total number of students and we're going to multiply the total number of students times the percentage breakup and then put that value into a list called distributed students. So now I'm going to create another list, and that other list will be a list of how the students are distributed, right? So we get this value from input. We get 1,000 students or 100 students. We have the percentage list. So why don't we iterate through that percentage list at the same time? We grab it, we multiply it by the number of students, and then we take that value and we create another list called distributed students. Right? So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to get rid of this print. I'm going to scroll up. So I fixed or created a list of brunch prices. I created a list of percentages. Now I want to create a list of how the students are distributed. So I'm going to create a list called distributed students. Again, notice that I'm referring to it in the plural. And what I'm going to say is for I in range 4. Now, before we go any further, let me go back to my Excel spreadsheet. And let me look at all the list that I have or I'm planning to have. You'll notice something, and this is a very common practice when we're using arrays or list. Notice that under brunch prints, brunch prices, notice that the first year is located under indices 0, and under percentage of students, the first year is under indices 0. The distribution of students is for first year is under 0. These all line up. Notice how they all line up. And that's what we often want to do, because if I can iterate through one list, I can iterate through multiple lists at the same time. So I can eventually use these lists because I know all first year information is in indices 0. All second year information is in indices 1. All third year information is under indices 2. All fourth year information is under indices 3. And by arranging my list and the order of my list in that regard, it can improve the performance of my computer. Now, is that going to do it all the time? No, not necessarily. But in this particular case, it works out really, really nice. So let me go back to my thing here. So I'm going to say I, and going to get a little complicated here. So let me copy and paste. And when I copy and paste, I am going to explain what it is going on. It says we're going to create a list called distributed students, right? And that is going to be derived from, we're going to use a pen, and append on a list means just put the information we want at the back of the list, last item on the list. We're going to say, don't worry about the typecasting, it will be an integer. It says take the percentage of students at I. So take that thing at when we first go through it, at the 0 indice, and multiply it by the total number of students. Right? So in our example, it's 0.1. We're going to say 0.1 times the total number of students, put that into this distributed list. We go on to the next indice, we go on to the next, we go on to the next. Now, and when we're done, we're going to say print distributed students. All right? So iterate through percentage of students, and while you're doing that, multiply the percentage of students by the total students and put that into a new list called distributed students. So we'll say one, doesn't matter, and we'll say 0.1, 0.1, 0.5, 0.3, right? And we're going to have 100, and we're going to have 100 students. And we can see that 100 times 0.1 is 10, 10, 50, 30. So now, going back to my Excel spreadsheet, we have all this lining up right here. So we've created a bunch of these lists, okay? Now, here's where we want to use this list times this list, all right? So now what we want to do is we want to calculate how much they made, total amount of how much they made for a brunch. So let's go back. All right, I'm going to get rid of this. We know that there's only 4, and that's fine. We'll leave it at that. And let's calculate the total brunch. So we're going to have another variable called total, and we're going to make that equal to 0. And in this regard, we're going to say for I in range 4 again. We'll just use 4 again. We're going to say total is going to equal to total plus, let's do all those calculations, right? Now, That's going to be based upon 100 times 12 plus 100 times 10 plus 50, the value 450 times 7, 350 times 5. I know we're using different numbers, don't mean to confuse anybody, but basically we're going to take the distributed student number and multiply that by the brunch cost, right? So we're going to go through that loop again. All right, so what do we have? We're going to have distributed students, first element, or whatever element, times the brunch prices So what is this doing? It's going through both lists at the same time. It's grabbing the students at element 0 and multiplying that by the brunch price at element 0. And all right, let's see what we get. 1,000, 0.1, 0.1, 0.5, 0.3. And we have 100 students, right? And 100 students going to brunch is going to produce $720. Now, we're going to stop here on this video because the second video will work through all the logic associated with this particular question or this particular problem. But I want to stop here at this video. It's gone pretty long because this is the heart of what we're doing. We're creating a list within a program. We're creating a list from some kind of input. We did the split. Then we're creating another list based upon all that other information. And if we've done it right, it lines things up really nice. We can iterate through the entire list and things like that. So let's stop here on this video. And if you want to see how the rest of this logic works out, I've done pretty much 90% of the code, right? I've done a great deal of code because the first thing is just trying to get the money, find out the money and things like that. So hope you watch the second video, but this is a good example of lists. That being said, let's go learn something.